Good afternoon, everyone. As Gail mentioned, my name is Jared Kellogg. I'm VP of Strategy for SDN NFE at Netcraker. Today, as mentioned, I think what we're going to be looking at in the next 20 or so minutes is a discussion around the revenue opportunities and the ability for carriers, specifically service providers, to differentiate and add value to their supply chain and their value chain as it relates to the B2B services that they introduce for enterprises specifically. So we'll talk a bit about that. We'll talk a bit about some of the challenges, barriers to entry right now for service providers, and also what type of approaches have worked for those that have adopted these solutions, that have taken them to market. What have they been successful? How have they been successful to do that? So we'll start and we'll look at all those different facets as we get through. So real quickly as we introduce, and we'll just, sure, no worries. As we kick into it and we start talking about it, the first space that we're really going to focus on, look at, is the opportunity for carriers to target enterprises in a more comprehensive way, and the type of services they introduce, both in the SDN and FE side, but also the other type of value-added services and cloud applications that are key and instrumental to those type of customers today that they're already using and relying upon from a variety of different vendors, from a variety of different partners. And we'll look at how the value proposition of an SDN NFE cloud can take the actual concerns, I would say, out of launching and monetizing those services. Do we have a clicker, by the way, Gail? Oh, I'll grab it real quick. Do a clicker? Okay. Can we jump to the next? Perfect. So to take a look at this market, right? So enterprises in general that carriers are serving, they have embraced cloud adoption a lot earlier than a lot of the service providers in terms of the services that they launched. They've moved everything from infrastructure to the cloud to the type of applications that they're running, from the productivity, from their employees, pushing more and more there. The challenge has been the demand and the need to lower the OpEx model, right? That's part of the benefit of why enterprises have moved to the cloud. But the second has been that enterprises have more and more of a demand for bandwidth, right? And the bandwidth consumptions and the connectivity and consumption that's associated with what service providers can provide value historically to this type of a customer. The problem is you introduce all the services that we all know well and talk about every day, the things like SD-WAN, and virtual connectivity services. What you limit the ability to differentiate as a service provider. Now enterprises are going towards a number of different over-the-top provider, SD-WAN direct providers, system integrators, and others who are able to exploit that relationship that used to be a dependency on connectivity. It's no longer a dependency on connectivity. So we're going to look at, within that market and with this type of adoption, how do service providers course correct? How are they course correcting to take advantage of that and find new revenue potential, and to make sure that they keep their incumbency with some of these most valuable customers that they have? Can we jump to the next? So looking at the market from a high level before we dig down into some of the more details, right? The revenue potential in the next 3 years, it kind of boils down to two different opportunities. On one side, there's the opportunity for carriers and service providers to grow the virtual connectivity business. This is why you see virtually everyone that you talk to that's from a carrier or service provider at this show or any other show, they're launching SD-WAN. They're launching some form of virtual CPE or universal CPE or different use cases associated with next-gen connectivity so that they can compete in that market. But if you look at the market share, right, which Gail mentioned in the introduction, which I think is a very important piece, service providers only have roughly 16% or so of the SD-WAN market, right? That's a huge opportunity for them to grow and increase that as that increases their revenue and their penetration. But you can't do it by selling SD-WAN alone. You can't do it by selling virtual CPE alone. You can't do it by just selling the connectivity piece. The rest of the growing revenue, right, when you look at it from the lion's share, is also coming from, thank you, sir, value-added services, cloud applications, and the infrastructure that those enterprises are relying upon. If you look at how carriers are rolling out services today, they're not necessarily thinking to bundle and delivering a platform that can bundle the connectivity with the value-added services, with the cloud applications, with the infrastructure piece. And in order to create a compelling value proposition, they have to start to look towards that. If you look at the timeline, this is really carrier specific, looking at the timeline of, where are they? What are they launching? What's the roadmap? And which one of these different services should be virtualized and should be put together and should be sold together and should be a revenue opportunity to be paired together. If you look at the carriers that have been successful in this, like we mentioned, everyone is launching SD-WAN, but launching SD-WAN alone at this point in time, especially in 2018, in a market that's vastly becoming commoditized, in a market that has great penetration from the technology providers and the over-the-top and direct SD-WAN vendors, is not going to be your differentiating secret sauce, so to say, as a carrier that's going to allow you to take more of the revenue share of the market. The second question is always this: well, is there a risk that my SD-WAN business is going to cannibalize my MPLS business, my traditional business, right, which makes great money, which is still an important and will remain an important part of all carriers' business moving forward in the near term? How do I find a way to implement something like SD-WAN and still make revenue and find a business case for SD-WAN that makes sense? So when you look at this concept, and I'm going to talk about it in a bit more detail, this idea of this SDN NFV cloud, it's about no longer providing just the virtual connectivity service. This is as commoditized as it can get right now, and there's no way to differentiate on it alone. So what we need to do is we need to focus on the other elements of combining those connectivity services with the value adds. If you look at what carriers are doing, everyone has the same roadmap, right? Everyone has picked some type of SDN, SD-WAN technology from the network side. They're launching that, and they have a roadmap for firewall. Same story everywhere you go. Everywhere you go. How do you differentiate that from every other service provider when you're launching a technology plus a firewall? You need to be able to do it plus that, plus the infrastructure as a service, whether it's you're selling your own data center connectivity, whether you're also doing it for partners, AWS, Microsoft Azure, others, and enterprise and productivity apps. And this is honestly the key. If you look at the customers who are actually succeeding at making money in this space, they're not selling SD-WAN to customers. They're not selling virtual firewalls to customers. They're selling customer-centric bundles and services that include business productivity applications, things like unified communications, things like virtual firewall, and things like the flexibility of virtual connectivity and things like SD-WAN, and they're packaging them together. But traditionally, if you're doing this as a carrier, this is siloed across all types of different IT stacks. Right? This requires integration. This requires product catalogs. This requires a place to actually sell that. And the cost to roll out a service and a platform like that destroys your business case, completely destroys your business case. So the premise is, how do we do this thing in the cloud, this approach to connectivity, this approach to value-added services, this approach to adding all these different components without doing a 1 to 2 year business transformation that service providers and carriers are all rightfully so scared of, especially in a space where we're unsure of how much real revenue potential is there. You have to be able to do it quick. You have to be able to do it much cheaper, right? So that's what the premise is around adopting this idea of SDN NFV cloud. If I look at it from my perspective, I look at it in 3 real key barriers that need to be crossed for carriers to make more money in this space, right? And this is from, we spend a lot of time, our daily life is sitting there and encountering these hurdles with service providers and saying, how do you feel you're going to be able to differentiate? How do you believe you're actually going to be able to bring all of these different verticals of revenue generating products and services together? And how do you make that consistent from a digital experience for your customers? Those 3 portals, those pillars to me, first of all, on one side, as you roll out each and every one of these different services, you have to have a consistent digital customer experience layer. Has to exist. By the way, it doesn't exist today. If I pick an SD-WAN provider, right, technology is great, by the way, but and if you've used it, and if you're a semi-technical person and you've ever been inside any of those portals, it's not exactly the most friendly digital experience. And whether or not you're planning to turn over a lot of those functions to your customers, or if you're planning to do those on behalf of your customers, either way, that technology is quite complicated to actually use at the user experience level. If you're trying to unify that with your business portals, for example, your digital identity as a carrier, you're going to completely have disparate user experiences and journeys based on the technologies you introduce. I introduce SD-WAN to a customer. They have to learn how to use and configure this portal. It's extremely difficult to use. And by the way, on the enterprise side, for the business case for enterprise, they definitely want config capabilities. If I'm selling it to a medium business, for example, They probably don't want all the config capabilities, but they want the reporting. They want the dashboards. They want the analytics feeds, right, about traffic. They want to be able to see that information. They need that type of experience. And for service providers who are selling SD-WAN or selling any one of these other services, it's a very important component to be able to show your customers during the sales process, right? Look at this. These are the tools that you can use. This is how you can configure the system. This is how easy it is to use. So the self-service portal piece is where we see carriers starting. When they launch this, they're unifying that. The last piece is, what happens when you introduce something beyond just SD-WAN? You start introducing a virtual firewall. What's that? It's another portal. It's another portal. It's got another orchestration engine downstream that talks to the network. This is going to basically create infinite silos for every different VNF, every different value-added service that you roll out. And in reality, if you want to sell these things and you want to create a value proposition that the SD-WAN only provider doesn't have and the firewall doesn't have and the IoT applications provider alone doesn't have, is bundling them together. Service providers have the capability to retain the incumbency they have with connectivity if they can put all of these services together. But you can only do it if you have a unified self-service experience. The next piece is around the marketplace, right? So digital marketplace is an important concept for a couple of reasons. If I sell a customer, for example, next-gen connectivity, say it's SD-WAN, say I bundle it with virtual firewall and others, and I have an enterprise contract in place for that customer, I give them a place to come to manage all of the different value-added services and apps they can buy, right? Whether that's the productivity applications, whether I'm going on and buying Microsoft 365, or I'm going in and buying additional licenses for VNFs that I might be using. Instead of having them pick up the phone and call service providers, the marketplace is a key piece of this. Now, this is, and I'll be completely clear and transparent here, the marketplace is not the tool that you're saying that enterprises are going to come to service providers to go shopping on a marketplace to buy enterprise products, right? This is a tool. Once you have those customers, you create an experience that allows them to serve themselves, especially for simple products, especially for SaaS-based and cloud-based products, especially for existing contracts that you've already established with them. So the marketplace is a key piece. But to deploy a marketplace, you have to have a pre-onboarded ecosystem of partners. It's no value to you if you have to onboard every single one of these partners and bring them into this marketplace, and it's cost prohibitive both from an IT standpoint and from the way that you would launch this. It has to be a pre-integrated piece. And the third piece about the marketplace, it has to introduce automation, right? If there's no purpose of having a marketplace if I can't have flow through downstream through APIs and orchestration that will talk to a cloud gateway to go to cloud application servers and make sure that I can do real-time provisioning of those services. The second piece is if I'm buying additional licenses or buying additional configurations for VNFs, I need to rely on automation downstream in order to make the business case work. The only way you can do it, we all know, we've all heard the story, we're all here to talk about it this week, and we're always here to talk about it at these type of shows, is what is the role of orchestration, both service and network orchestration that lies beneath that. In order to achieve all this, in order to do it in the time that we're talking, you need to be able to do it quickly as a pre-launched SDN NFV cloud that supports those partners that you want to launch, that doesn't require transformation in order to do it, that comes as a out of the box or as a service type model for you to grow this business. That's what the carrier business has been missing when they're looking at platforms. They haven't had an opportunity to do that. I'm going to tell you 3 customers, 3 carriers who are succeeding in doing that, and we're going to talk about the examples, and each one of them is succeeding for reasons that you see on the 3 pillars on this slide. So in a bit more detail, right, self-service portal as an example. This is a customer, one of the largest tier 1s in North America, who launched SD-WAN back as early as 2015. At the time, they were one of the first in North America to launch SD-WAN, which gave them a few things. It's given them a lot of perspective, obviously, on the market. It's allowed them to figure out what works and what didn't. It allowed them to be able to course correct and to be able to figure out the business case, the market segments to chase after, and how to refine the business models of how they sell to those customers. Additionally, when they launched, there's one real key piece here. They launched with the technology provider from SD-WAN. They launched with their portal. Feedback from customers was pretty much immediate. Right? Like, I don't know how to use this. This is not what I expected. This was not the experience that you sold me on. Right? And this started as early as friendly trials. Right? I'm not even talking about the full-blown actual launch. This was the feedback they got out of friendlies. Okay? And they said, guys, we're not going to buy this from you. If I wanted this, I could just go directly. That guy knocks on my door as much as you do. I can get that service from him. What I expected was an integrated experience with everything else that includes my billing, my single sign-on that I have from you, all the other features that you enable my business in one place. And what they said was, we also have a roadmap, right? So in addition to the fact that we need to change this experience layer, customers are also saying, that's great. I am going to buy SD-WAN from you, but I also need virtual firewall. I need these other pieces. And they were introducing a different portal to serve that need. And customers are saying, this is completely defeating the purpose. I'll just go to those vendors for that. So the entire premise was putting together, as we mentioned, a consistent experience that, in this case, took both SD-WAN and virtual firewall, wrapped it under a single experience that's part of this My Account feature associated with this service provider, and includes, in fact, hooks into even the billing, right? Because what they learned was, you can develop this really cool, badass portal like what they did, but if no one knows it exists, no one will use it, right? How do you drive people to actually know that the technology that you're bringing is a differentiator for you as a service provider? So in this case, in this example, this particular customer said, you know what they do come here for? They come here for billing, right? They come here to see the bill, right? So that experience is seamless. If you're a customer of theirs on the business side, can literally see from one hand, I'm navigating, looking at what I'm paying for. I can look at my SLAs. I can look at my other agreements. And then I can hop in and I can actually do configuration on SD-WAN, on different policies. I can do configuration on virtual firewall. I can do configuration at the branch level or at the CPE level. And that's a really, really interesting piece. And it also provides the reporting and the dashboarding for the lower end of the market who doesn't want to do the config, but still wants to see the feedback in real time, right? The analytics in real time. All of those pieces are exposed there. When they did this, and this is a stat, they were actually speaking here, this customer was speaking here on a different panel. In between the time of when they implemented both of these services, SD-WAN and virtual firewall standalone, versus after the portal implementation that they did for this in the cloud, 200% number of customers onboarded onto the platform. Sales were much more successful at being able to target and differentiate on an existing experience for customers and upsell these type of technologies. The second thing that they did was they bundled these services in with unified communications and with productivity apps as well. So they're selling this not as a technology, they're selling this as an entirely different virtual business experience powered by them. Okay. Looking at a different provider example real quickly, right? So this is the largest value-added reseller in Germany. Their role is quite different than your classic telco, classic carrier, where you're looking at historically, what does a carrier provide? They provide your connectivity services and everything else. In this case, this particular customer was in the IT reselling and hardware space. And they were looking, just like anything else, at the evolving market. How do I get more value out of the value chain that I can provide to my customers? How can I challenge telcos more for their space? How can I take more of a lion's share of the cloud market, right? So how can I create a value proposition of combining hardware plus software and plus cloud apps? So what they did was, starting from being a box reseller, they launched this marketplace concept, the same piece, the middle pillar that we were talking about on the previous slide. And the entire premise is that all of these different partners that you see here on the screen are pre-onboarded partners of that marketplace that they could launch together, right? So that when you stand this up, you can stand this up extremely quickly, and you can pick from all of these different partners and all of these different vendors of sorts that provide an experience through this marketplace that can be seamless, that can be automated, right? That comes with all the APIs, that comes with all the integrations baked in. And as their evolution goes, they're now looking to say, why can't I compete for more of what telcos compete for? Why can't I compete more for what the SD-WAN providers and the system integrators compete for? Why can't I launch SD-WAN? Why can't I launch a firewall as a service? I already have a digital marketplace, right? I already have the components of a very successful IT and a hardware business. So this is the roadmap for them. And this is another threat to carriers, because this is a completely non-traditional example with no network, right? Who are going to tell customers, go and get the highest bandwidth from whomever, and I can sell you a better package of everything else on top of it. All the value adds you need, including what your enterprise what your business really needs, I can sell it to you. The third example is focused more on the orchestration side. So on the orchestration piece, really, really critical component. This is a tier 1 service provider in the Middle East who has deployed this digital experience in the automation facet, but they're doing it for a wide variety of different services. So not just one service, like not just an SD-WAN, not just a virtual firewall. They're doing this for both the consumer and the enterprise market. They're doing this for residential and enterprise virtual CPE, right? The only way you can achieve that with the type of features that they're enabling on the consumer side, which is burst bandwidth, right? Additional parental controls and features around that, including firewall at the customer prem. Whereas on the enterprise side, they have a very high end of the market that focuses on their VPNs and security services, but also launches, for example, a SD-WAN service as an option. All of this is through the same agnostic orchestrator, which means that when you put the portals on top, you're not doing the IT integration, the footwork, the actual full-blown transformation project to make these different components work. If you don't have the orchestration portion of the architecture, though, it will never work. So, real quickly, talking about the journey. How are customers getting there? How are they progressing? How do you start to where do you end? We talked about, the approach. Each and every one of your different providers and carriers today, they're starting from a different point. Many of them, though, they're starting with SD-WAN, right? And if we look at SD-WAN as an example, this is just one example, right? And the point being with the value-added resellers, they're starting somewhere different. With many customers and many carriers, they have ambitions on the network side that they're selecting network vendors, they're selecting network orchestration platforms, and they're moving up that way. So the workflow and the flow that you're going to see here is just an example. But take SD-WAN as an example. You launch SD-WAN like everyone else, and then you realize that like everyone else, it's very difficult to distinguish this from anything else, especially if you're selling it standalone, right? And we have the same challenges. So you say, okay, then I'll take this and I will implement a self-service portal component to that. You implement a self-service portal component and you realize that still you're not able to package it and make it any more distinguished different than your existing connectivity services. Even if you provide a nice UI layer and a nice customer experience layer, you need to be able to bundle it in with additional value-added services, right? In order to do that, you have a reliance upon service orchestration. You have to go down to be able to manage multiple VNFs, multiple different types of partners in the same time. You'd have to have the orchestration component underneath that. And it can't be a full-blown transformation just to add an additional VNF or add an additional partner. And finally, as you look at things like addressing different markets, whether it's the SMB market or as you course correct, when you start to get feedback from customers and you're creating packages that you're taking to market, you start to realize where there's opportunities to sell through the marketplace, right? Because the marketplace is for a carrier, it's the evolution. It's not usually the initial start, right? It's once I can sell them a really compelling value proposition, then which types of products and services can they serve themselves on and to support that life cycle. So for each case, the goal is always how do we integrate that back to the end-to-end full stack, okay? And how do we continue to bring functionality that's necessary to tie in the end-to-end IT and network processes associated with that. So again, in closing, essentially, there's two pieces to say. There's a lot of different options in terms of transformation, but in order to achieve this type of SDN NFV cloud, right, we have to look at alternative approaches. We have to look at the ability to offer something as a service, right? So this is our value proposition to this space, and as it's grown over the years of our investment, this is the concept that we've culminated with. It was to offer all of these partners, all of the features that I talked about today, from the customer experience layer to the orchestration and otherwise, and do it in an as-a-service model, do it in a truly cloud-hosted and operated model, so that you can take this at more of an out-of-the-box platform and product with the features enabled and start to define which ones fit for your business case to launch. And these are 3 different examples, and this is the last slide that we're talking about. Depending on where you start, you may start from the connectivity and value-added services side. You may be launching these types of services. You may start from the productivity applications like value-added resellers, and you may even start like the IoT and M2M providers, like one of the largest mobile providers in North America who launched narrowband IoT using this exact same platform in a matter of 6 weeks, okay? Launching SD-WAN in 10, okay? That's the ability of a cloud-native architecture that's already stood up in the cloud. You pick the technology, we find the business case, and we launch that together. So that's a little bit of the premise of how we can bring these services together to group more revenue, to focus more on the customer rather than the technology, And I think this is kind of the future that carriers are looking at in terms of how to deliver more revenue in this space. Thanks, Gail.